Welcome back, everyone, to another episode of Sisto Says, powered by Design 2147, a New York City building and code consulting firm. I have a great guest. Welcome back, Anthony Brannan of Metro Mechanical.
Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
So we have a great topic today. Last time we did a podcast together, we talked a lot about Local Law 97. We talked about conversion of going from gas to electric and how they're going to do it. But, as always, the world is constantly changing, Anthony. And today we're going to talk a lot about refrigerants because the laws have changed throughout the country, as well as New York City, about what type of refrigerants are going to be allowed in air conditioning units, right, and heat pumps, and what we used to use, what we're going to use, and this transition phase that we're in right now. I mean, we're right in the middle of it. So tell us a little bit about what's going on.
So I guess for right now, we are still in sort of a transitioning phase in terms of how the regulatory bodies are going to allow us to do our work going forward. So this is going to be a little bit more of a significant change rather than just upgrading what we did from in 2010 when R22 got phased out into the R410A. Right. So now we're going into what they call the A2L category. You have R454 and R32.
So the A2L represents two different categories of refrigerant. The main piece is A2L, but there's these two different types of refrigerants.
Yes, and different manufacturers are utilizing different refrigerants for whatever
so Carrier
reason.
may use one, and Dayton may use another, and Mitsubishi may use something else.
So right now, Mitsubishi is utilizing R454 for all of their equipment less than 65,000 BTUs, which is single-phase equipment.
The small
call
stuff.
it like 5 tons and below.
The smaller
Approximately.
stuff.
Okay. And then on the larger scale stuff, the 3-phase equipment and larger, they're going to use the R32. So Daikin, on the other hand, is going across the board R32 with everything that they're bringing in. They've also been using it for quite some time. R32 has been around for a while, not here, obviously.
Overseas, right?
Overseas in Europe.
Because I see those units all over
in the Middle
Europe.
East, there's some Middle Eastern countries using R32 since 2014. So I guess the issue lies within the fact that there's a couple of misconceptions. Some people automatically think that it's some sort of propane-based refrigerant, which it's not.
Okay.
So
there's no real gas in it.
There's a certain level of flammability, right?
But so is the old stuff.
Is concerning, right? And I guess it's just the way we build it and go about it now is what's changing. So you have ASHRAE, you have UL, and then you have the good old city of New York, right?
my favorite place.
That has their own ideas on the way they think it has to go in.
Right. So just so that the audience understands that this gets complicated in New York City, because this question comes up to us a lot, where there are, like NFPA, just like UL, a UL listing is given to a piece of equipment. But sometimes, depending on the code, that UL listing has to be changed for it to be manufactured in New York City. And that's because their laws may take a piece of the federal law or a national law, but then they amend it for New York City. So now you get this hybrid in between, and hence where we are in the 5 boroughs.
Well, sure. UL will be the most stringent, right, of what we talk about. And then how you adapt it to work within the region that you're in and what makes sense. Right?
Correct.
So ASHRAE is more or less a guideline, right? Mm-hmm. And ASHRAE will give you what they feel is adequate enough to utilize that refrigerant. New York City, on the other hand, has a lot of other regulatory bodies that have a lot to say about what goes in.
And we have so many diverse kinds of buildings. You got 1 and 2 family houses, you got single family houses, and then you got, 100-story buildings. There's a big span between a 1 family in Whitestone and a 100-story, pencil tower in Midtown Manhattan.
Don't be surprised if down the road we start talking chillers again and chilled water and hot water, because how the coolant flows throughout the buildings is apparently the biggest concern.
Correct.
So,
Because you got to get it from point A to point B to get to the air handler.
So I've heard a couple of different things from some of the manufacturers that are dealing with the city of New York and dealing with UL and ASHRAE on, what makes sense, how they could, regulate it, and how they could come up with a concept that works. One of the things that's going to change right off the bat is they are going to really prefer hard tubing over soft tubing on these.
And that makes a lot of sense,
Yeah.
because when you think about it and you look at it, even in my one family house in Stamford, Connecticut, it looks like a snake going through my house with just a little bit of insulation on it. And you would think that someone comes along and wants, it's in a closet, but it's not in a shaft. It's just like a snake going through the building, and it's I'm sure with the new refrigerants, and like you said, there's even though it might be small, there's still the possibility of it being flammable, So I'm sure that the city's probably thinking like everything else years ago, right? How many years ago did we have all the gas piping going through the walls? We didn't have it in a fire-rated enclosure. It went right through a regular wall.
Yeah.
Now, it's got to be all rated, right?
Yeah. Well,
So I'm sure that that's going to change too. Shafts and venting and
absolutely. I've heard so many different types of proposed options, almost to the point where they're talking about exterior piping on the exterior of buildings in some sort of a shroud,
right.
And carrying it straight up.
Well, if you look in Europe, that's how they do it. A lot of places, when you're in Europe, if you go throughout Italy and you see all those small little Mitsubishi units, it's all concrete. They're not putting it in the wall after the fact. They're running it all on the side of the building and then down into the air handler and just making a small hole.
Yeah. Well, if you turn back the clock a little bit, talk about natural gas for the moment, right? In the city,
Can't get any, but that's
but years back they made a lot of very different decisions on how you can run natural gas in buildings now. You're not allowed to run it through certain areas. It's got to be. I've done some renovation jobs where I've seen natural gas piping on the exterior of the building now.
Yeah.
And they just put it in a shroud, and that's the only way to get it from point A to point B. And I think the only good thing that could come of this is that now there's going to be a lot more attention paid to how the piping gets from one place to another.
Right, from point A to point B.
So I've been on some jobs, and sometimes, they put so much restrictions on how we can get our piping work done. And I feel like on a long term, it's really not the best idea. I mean, if you could figure out how to get an elevator shaft straight up from the basement up, and a laundry chute and a garbage chute, or whatever it may be.
Right, with today's technology, why
figure
can't
out
we
a way
figure
how to
that?
get the pipe straight up. And the problem lies within the fact that they just don't respect it in a way that they should. And our pipe is designed by linear footage, how much
curves, all of it.
Oil
It's all
and
engineered.
refrigerant mixture, feet per minute. There's a lot of stuff that goes into it.
Because the more you snake it and the more you go around, the less
every time
efficient
you
it
add,
becomes.
Right. So I always try to find.
Well, that's a great point, because if you really think about it, right, as an studying architecture many moons ago, you would think about in every stairwell there was a standpipe. But when the structural engineer did it, they always used a different kind of detail at the landings, because they knew that they couldn't put a full I-beam there, because then the standpipe would be in the landing and in the way of egress. So they designed it so that the pipe could sit in the corner in the proper place. When we did plumbing, you're doing plumbing shafts, you think of that shaft to be as efficient as possible. So why don't they think of it in mechanical? Because they think of it as like spaghetti, just weave it around.
They just don't understand the theory behind refrigerant flow. And refrigerant and oil mix together in the pipe, and there needs to be a certain amount of pressure maintained in the pipe. And every time you make a turn, you're adding pressure reduction.
Of course, you got friction.
So when you're sitting with somebody who really doesn't understand that, and they're telling you go up, down, left, right, and you added 8 elbows in a pipe run, and you try to explain to them, you're going to cause a tremendous reduction in efficiency.
Well, the same thing used to happen
we
with
don't have the room. I'm like, figure
you
it out.
Find it, right? And well, it's just like sprinkler. You need 15 psi at the last sprinkler head. Well, if you put 43,000 elbows, by the time you get to the last head, you got 2 pounds of water there.
Well, think forever, steam risers all went straight up.
Yeah.
Have you ever walked into an old building in the corner of every
They
room?
didn't
You just
care.
see a steam riser just going straight
didn't
right
care.
up because it had to go straight up.
It had
There's
to
no
go
other
up.
way.
It was part of the charm of the
Correct,
old law
correct.
tenement.
So the only good thing that could come of this is I think they're going to pay a lot more attention
to the efficiency.
and how the pipe goes from one point to another. I've heard that there's some conversation about not allowing the piping to run more than 2 ceiling and floor construction without having some sort of shaft that is
Makes
ventilated, whether it be mechanically or not, fireproofed.
Right.
And I've heard some ideas about now installing systems every other floor in a louvered space so that you don't have to pass now through 8 floors to get to the roof where the units are going to be. So there's a lot of talk about that.
And part of that too is, I mean, you know it better than me. You know, when we go do a C of O and we get on some of these, it looks like a farm now.
Yeah.
There's all these small condensers. There's 25, 30, 40 of them. You know, and they're all in one place. But like you said, maybe the first 10 floors, they're super efficient. But the further down we go and the more we lose pressure, maybe they're not as efficient. Maybe they don't work as well. You know, just so many things in terms of engineering. They all can't be the same if one's at 1 foot and the other at 10 feet and the other one's 60 feet down. It's 6 stories.
Yeah, and when you think about the service side of it, so, you know, we finished some buildings 18, 20, 24 stories high,
Right.
and they're being utilized as primary heat. So now, if there's a problem with the heat in that particular unit or
gotta
area
trace
of the
that-
building,
you
you
gotta
got to go up to the roof on the 24th floor and stand out, you know, potentially in a blizzard or 0-degree weather, trying to troubleshoot an outdoor unit to get the heat going. It's one thing to be without air conditioning for a little while, but people can't be without heat in dead of winter. So there's a lot of stuff that you got to think about.
It's funny how when we talk about these kind of changes, they're great changes because the world needs to continue to evolve. Mechanical equipment needs to evolve, right? You know, back in the day, we didn't even have air conditioning, right? When we grew up, there was one air conditioner in my parents' room. My mom and dad slept, and all the kids slept on the floor.
We put a curtain on the door.
We put the curtain on the door, and that was it. And that was part of our culture. That was part of our fabric. I mean, old school Italian in a small house with the kitchen in the basement where it was cooler, and that was our air conditioning, right? And today, everywhere we go, we have all of these things, but the implementation of it is what we talk about on the show. How do you transition from this refrigerant to that? And I guess, you know, for me, and it was troublesome to me because when my guy would come to my place in Stamford that I recently sold, he would say, you know, Mr. Martello, your unit's probably about 30 years old. You know, if your condenser goes, you're going to have to replace everything. And I used to throw a fit, Anthony, because one of the units was in the attic. And that attic had trusses. I don't even know if you could get a new unit through there. They probably would have had to do something completely different, right? Because it was... So tell me a little bit about that, because I'm sure that unit had the old R410 or whatever the numbers are. I'm sorry, guys, but I think it was a 410, right? So now you have a unit, the condenser goes, you can't put that refrigerant back in. You basically, is it true that you would then have to replace both sides of it because you can't go get a condenser that matches what the other half of the unit is working? So tell us a little bit about that, because I'm sure you're running, I mean, you don't do small little residential things, but it happens even on bigger projects.
So the concern really is what the government's going to allow manufacturers to ship here in order to replace it. What is going to be allowed?
So they won't give you the R410 refrigerant anymore. They're going to give you this. Now, will this new refrigerant be compatible that you could pull all the old one out and put it in?
No, you're going to wind up having to replace the air handlers. So
condenser and air
So
handler.
starting on the commercial side, if you have a rooftop package, heating and cooling, we're changing the unit actually this Friday on a project right now. We're going to R32. It's self-contained. It doesn't affect anybody. When you start talking into the splits, it's going to be what the government's going to allow manufacturers to bring in to the country in order to resolve problems of older equipment that needs to be retrofitted. Whether they're
So
going to
do you
allow
think there's a
410.
possibility to hold on to the air handler, or you think it's
I
pretty
don't
much
no. If you're going to switch from an R410 to an R32, you're going to replace the air handler.
Right? You have to do both sides.
You're going to have to do both sides, and that's just going to be. So what you're going to find a lot of people trying to do right now is really find parts for all these older pieces of equipment, because the next part of the equation is every time you replace an outdoor piece of equipment on a roof, you got to file an equipment use permit.
Listen.
So
we have people call here. People call us all the time, and you know, I'm glad you brought up equipment use permits, because we haven't talked about that. And people call us all the time.
Certificate of compliance now.
Certificate of compliance, right? So equipment use permit. So just we'll spend few minutes on it, because I love to talk about this, because I've been around when it evolved, right?
Yeah.
And when it evolved, the reason why we have equipment use permits has really nothing to do with the Department of Buildings. It has everything to do with the fire department.
Yes.
And people say, well, what do you mean? I said, well, because back in the day, people would just take an air handler, put it on a wood roof, pipe it, and be done with it.
Ocean Avenue in Brooklyn supermarket back in the 80s was a very bad fire.
The unit
And I
crashed.
think Unit crashed through the roof.
And killed the fireman.
Yeah, and that was the beginning of all of that.
Right.
Which makes sense because
100% sense. So when people
100%.
call us, they always say, "Why do I need to file this? Why did?" And we go through this, right?
Yeah.
And to this day, we still get calls. We're talking 30 years into this, Anthony, that people still call us and say, so what do you mean I got to put this on dunnage? I said, well, if you have a wood roof, you got to put steel from parapet to parapet, and you have to support the unit. It can't be on, if you have a steel deck, you could put it on a curb, but even then, you need vibration, there's codes. You can't just arbitrarily do anything you want to do, right?
No, of course not.
So I think that I've always been pro, I am in the code world, and I think laws are there. They're not only there to protect the people that are installing it, right? Because we have safety. Two, the laws have to be there to protect the people that are living in the building or using the building day to day. And then you got our first responders that need to be protected, that are trying to save your
the most
life,
important part.
right? So now we go around and around, and you look around the city, you see these little Mitsubishi units, people are, putting them on the side of a wall. Half of those have no permits, let's be honest. They're not permitted on the front of a building.
Never.
They're not permitted on the lot lines.
No.
People have them everywhere. So, forget about refrigerant. Now we're getting into a whole different topic, which is people are desperate for heat, they're desperate for air conditioning, and people will just come and throw something together that unfortunately creates non-compliances throughout the city, wherever they are. So the reason I brought up about the refrigerant is because most people want to do the right thing. And the right thing is, if your unit goes bad and you can't get the refrigerant that your unit can take, you have no option but to replace the whole thing, file it, and get a new certificate of compliance.
we have customers that we immediately have to get temporary cooling and heating into.
Sure,
because
that's my point.
If you're going to replace a unit on the roof, you got to get started, get the plans, get it approved, and that doesn't take overnight. It's not an emergency repair.
Right.
If you're replacing a piece of equipment on the roof, you're going to go through the whole process. So a lot of times you're like, start preparing for a temporary cooling, system, because this is not going to be done overnight, because we can get the equipment, but we can't get permitted to do the job.
Correct.
It's going to take some time.
Right, and you need to hoist it. You need a boom. You need this. You need that. You need a DOT permit. You need a building
So
permit.
that's what I mean.
You
So
need
it's-
this. You
it's
need a
weeks
special
before
inspection.
you can make that
Right,
repair
and you need
sometimes.
somebody to draw it. You need somebody to draft it. You need an asbestos report if the building's
Right.
old. And we go through. You know it. I know it.
Yeah.
It's not that easy.
That's why the temp cooling and heating is so huge right now, because there are a lot of times where we're just completely handcuffed.
you can't move fast enough.
Can't do it. What goes back to what I was trying to say is some of this equipment, without changing it out, a lot of people are going to really be trying to get parts just to repair it.
Well, it's like
maintain
anything
it for
else.
as best as they can.
For as
until
long as
it's
they can.
Absolutely
And
impossible.
then you have the ability to file ahead of time and say, okay, Anthony, we've run our course. You know what? In the spring, when it warms up a little bit, come in, let's finally flip it out, because we can't live off these old parts in the old unit.
Yeah.
It happens. It happens. So as always, as we kind of go through the show, there's my good friend Andrew Peters. You've answered this question before, and I've asked you this last time, which is, if you're looking in the rearview mirror, it's small. If you're looking through the windshield, it's big. We always want to look forward. We don't want to look back, right? So looking forward, tell us a little bit about what you're hearing about the next level of the implementation. I know we spoke about some dates coming up in 2026, so tell us a little bit about that.
So originally, some of the smaller lines of equipment were not going to be available anymore as of December 2024. And the larger scale equipment originally was slated to be December of 2026. I was told over the past winter that I think New York City rolled back the time frame a full year to the end of 2025.
Oh, so they pushed it forward, really?
Yeah, they rolled it. Yeah, exactly. Well,
they
call it whatever you want it, from 26 to 25.
So the manufacturers, the city went to the manufacturer and says, no, we want you to roll out the equipment earlier.
Yes, they want it to be available come January of the upcoming year.
So right now, the smaller units, which you classified as like 5 tons, single phase, the stuff that's 3 phase, they want to make that mandatory by January.
You're allowed to install it up until a permitted job, I think August 1st of this year.
So if you had a permit from a year ago.
If you had a permit up until August 1st, you're allowed to install some of that equipment, because there's some, obviously, equipment left over on the R410 side.
Well, there's inventory.
But obviously, if you're going forward, nobody wants to install anything like that right now, because going forward, if you ever have to replace it, you're going to replace it with what's coming out now new.
Right.
So I'm in the middle of a couple of jobs where earlier in the year they were designed in one way, and we did a total redesign now, because going forward, we're going to need to go with the newer.
Right. If you're ordering equipment that they're going to, listen, we're on a project together.
Yeah.
I started a project 2.5 years ago. You're just doing the mechanical now.
Yeah, of course.
For whatever the reasons, right? The project got slowed.
Yeah.
They couldn't get financing.
Yeah.
So just because you started a project in 2022 doesn't mean you're doing the mechanical 2022 in 3 months.
No,
you got to wait for the whole structure
Yeah.
to get closed in. So here you are, you're on the job on Prospect Avenue, and you're going ahead. Well, when your delivery is impacted by what the manufacturers want to give you, and if it was designed this way with the old stuff, now you're looking at a new design, because this is the equipment they're sending you now.
Yeah.
And it brings up a very valid point, which is, cost, right?
Yeah, of course.
You bid it with this equipment. Now you're buying that equipment. Now there's tariffs. Now there's this. Now there's that.
There's a lot of stuff to consider, because nobody's got a crystal ball. But I guess we at least know going forward, right, what potentially is going to happen. So we know we got to be concerned with the material that we're going to use, right? We're probably going to go more to a rigid pipe system completely, right? We're always going to have to consider.
And now when you say rigid pipe, are you talking about just copper that's sweated or?
No, I'm talking about rigid hard tubing in lieu of the
correct, but
soft
I mean,
tubing.
but it would be copper.
Yes, it'll be copper. It'll be copper tubing, all brazed, obviously, and probably minimize any sort of soft tubing. Maybe not even have it at all. A lot of the new equipment is going to come with sensors now, leak detection sensors.
That's a big thing. I did a whole podcast on it. Leak detection in bigger buildings is eventually. Insurance companies are not going to insure new buildings, and on the older buildings, they're going to give them major discounts for gas detection, water detention, smoke and carbon monoxide, and eventually anything in a shaft that has the possibility, they can put sensors and use AI and the internet and satellite to know it in a minute.
So the air handlers now are going to all come equipped with a refrigerant leak sensor.
So you'll know if the pressure dropped in the lines.
It'll automatically control the air handler and actually ramp up the speed of the motor in order to get rid of it, without it being concentrated in one area.
Wow.
So,
amazing.
And there's also some talk about how they're going to decide the return ductwork is going to be for a lot of this equipment, because in a lot of instances, some people use plenum returns,
Right.
which you're not going to be able to use plenum returns anymore. Secondly, you're not going to be able to utilize a return that's not hard ducted into each room that ducted air handler services.
Oh, wow.
So if it's servicing 3 rooms, you're going to have hard ducted supply and hard ducted return back to that air handler.
So you can't combine the returns.
You're going to combine it, but it's all got to be hard ducted from
Oh,
each room.
instead of using
Instead of using the ceiling as a plenum,
Right.
you're going to have to do.
Well, the plenums are inefficient. I mean,
Yeah, it's inefficient, but sometimes it's the only way people have done it in the past. So if you're now going to take an older system and convert it,
Forget
and
it.
it was set up that way, not only can you not just
you have to take all the ceilings down.
so that's a lot of the things that we're going to have to
Crazy.
deal with going forward. But I think in order to work around that, they're going to come up with multiple leak detection that would be installed throughout the system, not just in the air handler, in the ducted areas, in the shafts, and all
Right.
that other places, because that's the primary concern. So they're still like sort of working
So
through
much
a lot of,
evolving.
yeah, there's a lot of stuff happening right now. And like I said, if we were going to put up a building next year and we're still trying to figure out what we're going to do with shafts, with refrigerant tubing,
You got to know about it now.
you got to know opposite. You got to. So look, I'm sure there's a lot more that I don't even know. You know.
Well, nobody really knows because it's evolving.
Yeah, because it's evolving, and I'm sure all the larger scale engineering firms are dealing direct with manufacturers.
Of course.
And they're working through a lot
And
of
that's
stuff.
usually the manufacturer and the city dictates
Right.
what you're going to be putting in at some
Right.
point.
We only hear what trickles down until it's law.
Right.
Right.
Same
so we
thing
hear all
here.
the conversations.
Same
We hear a
thing
lot
here.
of the different. We don't know what they're going to decide to do, how they're going to decide to do it, but we know something's going to change in the very near future, and it's going to affect about how we do things.
No question about it. Well, Anthony, it's always such a pleasure for you to come in. You're such a great subject
Oh,
matter
thank you,
expert.
thank you.
Kind of gives our age away, but that's
Yeah, it's
okay.
all right.
We've been around for a couple of
Yeah.
different levels of
Yes.
mechanical and plumbing and
Yeah,
sprinkler
sure.
over the years. But it is changing. Hopefully, it's changing for the good. And I appreciate you coming in and giving us a little bit about this because it's very interesting and there's a lot of changes coming.
Yeah, no, thank you for having me back. I appreciate it.
Oh,
I
love
enjoy
having
it.
you back.
All right,
Thanks,
well,
Anthony.
Well.